Namaste and welcome to Urban Chatterati. This is Abhinav Prakash. And today I have with me a very special guest, Rahul Verma, who is a fellow at the Center for Policy Research and who's also pursuing his PhD in political science from the University of California, Berkeley. And he's also an author whose book, Ideology and Identity, right? Or Identity and Ideology.
Ideology and identity.
Ideology and Identity is a must read book because that gives a new framework, a new way of looking at the role of ideology in a multi ethnic society like India. So, Rahul, please welcome to the show.
Thank you, Abhinav, for having me.
So, Rahul, before we start this discussion, I would like to ask the question as to what shift you are seeing in the Indian polity at large. What are the large trends which we are grappling with as of today?
So many of you have also been writing about this, that since the arrival of BJP on the national center stage in 2014, basically forming the government with full majority, what we are witnessing is reshaping of the national political order. And many people like you and Suhas Palshikar and Yogendra Yadav and others have written that this is now the making of the Second Republic. So as you sort of like know that there are certain slow moving variables, right? Like with time, changes happen in many domains. So there are some slow moving variables, and then there are some fast moving variables. And these variables are also sort of interacting with certain catalyst basically which changes the pace, right? So for example, pandemic, which was not imagined like 2 years ago, is going to sort of alter certain changes that were taking place, or the disruption that has been caused by penetration of social media in this big way in last couple of years. So first big, like we both are interested in politics, the first big change that has happened after 2014 is the rise of a single party dominant system in India. I think, and many of the changes that are happening follows from that big shift. Uh, and because you see a dominant party system in India, which is led by the BJP now, it is unleashing certain social forces. And going forward, this is a moment of furnace. So you can only make some predictions about the future. Some may be right and some may be wrong. But the forces that are being unleashed, some are going to be good for the country, and some are going to be the bad. Some are going to be bad for the country. Uh, the second point, which so the changes you can see, one in the nature of party competition. What has also happened that the ideological median of Indian politics seems to have shift towards right. So you see certain change in the political culture, the way campaigns are being sort of conducted. You are also seeing that there is, because of the rise of BJP and decline in the status of oppositional parties, they are reduced to margins, right? The gap between the first party and the second party is so large that they seem like minor player in that sense, which is also creating sort of like vacuum in the political system. And trust in political parties are also declining in that sense. The third thing which you are seeing is BJP is creating new institutional and political arrangements in the country. So you have seen the dismantling of Planning Commission, Niti Aayog came instead of that. This government, so in the past, it has been happening, and perhaps after 2014, it's much more like the government is much more PMO heavy. Most of the decisions sort of like emanate from the PM's office, which is also sort of creating certain strains on the federal character of Indian politics. What you witnessed between 1989 and 2014, that states were sort of like important arena of not just political theater, but also policy making. That is also changing, again linked to the idea of, because many of the regional parties have become sort of like weaker in those sense. So overall, big shift in the institutional political culture, in nature of competitive politics, which is basically leading to a lot of changes in the polity. And it's a moment of furnace. So what you are also witnessing, lots of protests, which means, going forward, some of and these protests are happening because of the energies or the social forces which BJP, in the process of coming to power, have sort of like, tangled. And so some are going to be good for the country and some are going to be bad. And there are certain forces that are also going to be bad for BJP, because when you sort of like open a can of worm and negotiate it with, some of these things will not fall in place the way you expect, right? Like game will move on, and certain things may also hurt the person or the party which has initiated these changes.
Yes, agree. So if you take any action, there's a consequence of that, and there are also unintended consequences, which are, we need to be more wary about the unintended consequences of doing something. But you said that we are seeing the emergence of a dominant party system. A single party is now dominant. We have seen this movement before as well under the Congress. How is that dominance of the Congress is different from the BJP dominance of the politics today?
So each system has its own systematic features, right? And you see this debate happening among scholars and social scientists, that BJP's ideological or BJP's electoral dominance is not equal to Congress's dominance. Sure, right? Congress was the party of freedom movement. So when the first election happened in 1952 till 1967, which is the first party system, Congress was not only dominant nationally, but it was also dominant in the states. And that's why Rajni Kothari, in his paper on Congress system in India, wrote that, even the opposition emanates from within the Congress. And opposition parties in that sense just act as parties of pressure. So this and then you had the second party system where Congress was still sort of like electorally powerful nationally, but in states it was witnessing severe competition, which lasted till 1989. In 1989, Congress lost nationally as well. The states were already under competition, so you saw a rise of multi-party system. The 2014 basically gives the rise to BJP single party system. By 2017 or 2018, I think we started noticing the feature of BJP dominant system. And 2019 election basically confirmed what was happening. Now, how it is different? Yes, BJP does not have same level of electoral dominance as the Congress has in the first system. But it doesn't matter, right? Like BJP is starting from a very different position. Think of what BJP has managed to do in last 4 to 5 years. In states where it was not even a 2% party or a 4% party, is basically setting the competition, right? So in that sense, BJP has become a system defining party nationally. Even in small, even states, Tamil Nadu is not small, but BJP is a marginal player there. But what BJP is doing in that state is making other parties sort of like,
Respond to it.
respond to it. Like it's a 2%, 4%, perhaps 10% party there. In Bengal, BJP was not even 5% party pre 2014. Now it's basically knocking on the doors of power. In 2019, the eastern walls of India, which remained aloof to the BJP for long, was breached. Now in every northeastern state, BJP is either a power alone or with an ally, or is knocking on the door as in West Bengal. So that's the first feature of this dominant party system. Second, what happens in dominant party systems, you have an ideological sort of hegemony. Now, hegemony is a strong word, but I would see ideological hegemony in terms of agenda setting power and narrative defining power. And this is what is happening, right? BJP, as you said, like BJP does the action and then others are forced to respond to those things. Third, what you see is basically resource mobilization to an extent which is sort of like unimaginable few years ago. By resource mobilization, I mean both sort of like online mobilization in the world of social media and offline mobilization. The cadre strength, the organizational strength the BJP has, any message is basically transmitted at a very, very rapid pace. And some of you can say, like some of the things you can say the party exaggerates, but a lot of that is true. Like Home Minister Amit Shah in a recent rally in I think Kolkata with social media volunteers said you should create a group of WhatsApp that the message should reach to 50 lakh people within an hour. Now, perhaps it may not reach to 50 lakh, perhaps it may not reach in 1 hour, but that's the kind of resource mobilization they are talking about. And you could see, like, even in mainstream media, the discussions are dominated by what BJP does, or so, and that's both an effect of, in some ways, like, uh, uh, a lot of media basically toes the line of the government, and it's also a game of resources. Whoever has more money to buy out sort of space does that. So that's the third feature that you will see, resource mobilization. Fourth would be basically a charismatic leader presides on top of this machinery. You cannot get a dominant party system sustained for a long period of time. It's rare, you may get, but it's rare to get it without a charismatic leader on the top. So now you have Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who arguably is one of the most popular politician post-independent India, right? Like basically his image sells from north to south to east to west. So that's the four features. And if you add these four features, what you also see that opposition is totally disarrayed, confused, doesn't know what they have to do, what should be the plan. So they basically react. There are some moments of victories and celebration, but you don't see a clear line where opposition is heading to. So that's what sort of some similarities and differences.
True. So you also mentioned that such kind of political dominance also requires an ideological bedrock. And BJP's ideology is Hindu nationalism, Hindutva, right? As compared to the Congress, which had something like secular socialism and all those things. But it's often said that in India, ideology doesn't matter. Every party is doing what is in its short-term benefit. They are opportunist. Is it true in India that ideology simply does not matter in the politics, or do you see it otherwise?
So I think, we tend to play up this binary of ideology versus opportunism too much. Politicians are in the game to pursue power. That's their primary identity. If they were not pursuing power, then those are not political parties. Those are civil society organizations or NGOs. Basically, that what differentiates any civil society organization or NGO is pursuit of power. So politicians do that. They also pursue certain agendas that basically keeps them going in moment of a crisis, in moments of defeat. So I don't see them as binaries. As a pragmatic politician, you have to keep these two things together. If you are not in power and you still sort of like hell bent on some lofty ideas or ideals you have, that is called as dogmatism, right? Basically, latching on to ideas that may have no relevance, and you can only sort of like spread your message, spread your ideas, spread your ideology. Whether that's right or wrong, that's a different question. You believe in certain things that could be sort of set in motion only when you acquire some semblance of power. So these two things go together. When parties are in power, they do pursue their ideological agenda to a certain extent. You also need to understand that parties, not you, but everyone, like parties and politicians work under certain constraints of the system, right? You can't do everything you want because you have certain beliefs. The system allows only to do certain things at certain moment of time, because otherwise it would be costly, right? So for example, perhaps Prime Minister Vajpayee could have gone for Ram Mandir, but that would have been very costly for his staying power in the party. I don't know whether Vajpayee believed or not. I would like to argue that Vajpayee did believe in the project of Hindu nationalism and Hindutva, but he did not have enough numbers in his party at that moment of time to push something like this. Modi also waited in the second term to unleash many of the ideological agenda because there is a tighter grip on the institutions and structures to basically move towards power.
Yes, but when we talk about BJP's ideological framework, lots of people just compare it to fascism or Nazism. So that's keeping that aside. Do you see a long-term trajectory in the political evolution of India that this was somehow inevitable sooner or later? That you will have a Hindu assertion? Maybe doesn't matter one disagrees or agrees with Hindutva or whatever, but it's Hindu assertion broadly speaking, not necessarily Hindutva per se. Was it inevitable in the last 100 years?
So, in some ways, yes. And many would also quibble with this argument of inevitability of rise of Hindutva is because it's not a linear path, right? There are many critical junctures in these 100 years, and things could have gone either way. So you could not say that what you saw in 2014 and 2019, it would have definitely happened if you were sitting in 1920 or 1925, right? But if you join the dots, say from 1906 to 1925 to 1935 to 1947, then basically it's a zigzag path. But that's how things have reached. I think if you trace that path of 100 years, it seemed where we are today was bound to happen. Perhaps rise of Narendra Modi as a charismatic politician in 2014 uh, just sort of like speeded up the process that was already in the making. If Narendra Modi was not there, I remember someone wrote this line: "If Narendra Modi was not there, India would have invented him." Which is basically in a way that it's just the historical forces were moving in a direction that you needed a person or a personality to take those historical forces to the logical conclusion.
Mhm.
Now, why I say that it was inevitable? So, first of all, it's a Hindu majority country. So there is going to be a point in time where if this message within the community goes that you are being taken for granted, doesn't matter whether it is true or not. But if you manage to convince a sizable segment of this population that you are being taken for granted in your own country, there would be a backlash. And I think what BJP and its predecessors and the larger RSS family managed to do in these 100 years, slowly convince a larger segment of population slowly and slowly that you are being marginalized in this country. Like if you remember, this process didn't start in 1980 or 1940 or 1920, like way back when the writings were on the Hindu is a dying race, or the discussions which were taking place around Montemello reforms and Mongeau-Chelmsford reforms. Like there were sort of politicians of British India who were citing numbers of cow slaughter taking place in northwestern provinces at that time. They were like basically giving numbers. So in a sense, that sense of victimhood was built slowly, and then there were certain things happen in different moments of time. Uh, and it all got so slowly. When you get independence in 1950s, what you see is a fragmented right wing. You had very different versions of right wing. You had Bharatiya Jansangh, you had Swatantrata Party, you had right wing Hindu right elements within the Congress Party, you had Ram
Ramraj
Rajya
Parishad.
Parishad, you had Akhil Bharatiya Hindu Mahasabha.
Yeah.
Slowly, what happens that these forces either realize or like pragmatically they all slowly came together. First, Ram Rajya Parishad, Akhil Bharatiya Mahasabha, Hindu Mahasabha got into BJS. So now three parties are into one. By late 1960s, early 70s, you get even the Swatantrata Party segment within the BJS, a larger segment. Then basically the division within the Congress Party and Congress O segments moving towards the right. So when you get BJP in 1980, it is basically a culmination of all right-wing forces. And then historical events like Meenakshipuram temple incident happens in 1982. There is mobilization by VHP and then by Ram Janmabhoomi mobilization. So when in 1991 you get 18 or 20% of BJP, that is basically, if you add up the 7-8% of Jansangh, 6-7% Congress vote, 3-4% of Swatantrata Party, 1.5% of Akhil Bharatiya Hindu Mahasabha, similar for Ram Rajya Parishad. This is basically the 20% chunk that you get in 1991, is basically culmination of right-wing forces. Then perhaps through the 90s and 2000, what happens that a message within the core supporters of BJP goes that they are being sort of like taken for granted. Now, whether that's true or not, it doesn't matter, right? Like it, it was a need of the hour, in
Also,
my
we
opinion.
need to account for that in the last 100 years, the genocides of Hindus increased in the frequency. In the, you have the Malabar incident, then you had the partition, then in the 1950s, you had the entire ethnic cleansing of lakhs of Hindus from the Bangladesh. Then that continues, you have been completely wiped out from the Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan. Then you have the Kashmir as well in the 90s. So that feeling of being under siege basically continued
See,
and become consolidated.
partially you are right, because you can always get an argument. All these incidents which you mentioned are like incidents recorded in history, right? So there is nothing to dispute about the facts, what happened in Kashmir or in Bangladesh, or elsewhere. But you could get a similar sort of citation about Muslims being killed in partition riots and Hindu-Muslim riots that have been happening from 1950s till early 2000.
Yeah,
But as I said,
this is what I'm saying, that there was partition, right? So keeping aside that, in the 1950s we had in Bangladesh, which is
hmm,
Eastern Pakistan, then again the 71, then again the 90s. So
hmm,
while there are rights in India, Hindu-Muslim rights, but in other parts of the parts like Kashmir, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Hindus have been completely wiped out. I think
right,
it's
and
not
this all.
comparable. It's not comparable, basically. This is what I'm saying.
So I like both are sort of like tragic incidents, and I don't want to compare which side deaths were higher or not. Ultimately, in politics, as I say, it's how truth. The Henry Kissinger said, right? Like it doesn't matter what the truth is, but how the truth is perceived, right? So a message basically went within a larger segment of Hindu society that they are being sort of like targeted by a left liberal. I don't know how one can put these two words together, but that they are being sort of like targeted in their own land or victimized or given a short shrift. Uh, when Congress returns again in 2004 with the with UPA. Those I think the latter years of UPA basically added to those anxieties which were sort of like latent. So, like even what is true in of 90s and early 2000s, and many scholars have written about it. You had a conversation with Professor Badri Narayan, who has been writing about many of these things. Like way back in 2008, he wrote a book, Fascinating Hindutva. That there are elements of Hindutva which fascinates the lower caste in India. And scholars have been basically mentioning that, Dalit politics and Hindutva politics is at odds, whereas the field work by him suggests that, both are not at odds. There are certain elements which can gel together. Similarly, data which has been collected by survey data which has been collected by Lokniti CSDS has been suggesting that the elements of BJP's ideological repertoire has resonance in Indian politics. Even when BJP got defeated in 2004 or was forced to leave office, there was a resonance of their ideological agendas. So in post 2009, what happens is there a culmination of several anxieties. I think one talked about anxiety is basically slowing a little bit slow down in economy, but more of corruption. So it sort of like builds a narrative around that the Congress government or those who are sitting at the top are basically siphoning off resources and not letting basically the ordinary Indians, so the charges of dynasticism and other things, the ordinary Indians do not have opportunity to realize things in life, basically realize material goods or realize prosperity in life. And the reason it is happening because the things or institutions or channels of mobility has been captured by these vested interests. So that was the first anxiety. Second, I think, and it's again a matter of how mobilization happens, how public opinion is crystallized and created. There was a sort of like leadership anxiety. And that leadership anxiety was built not because Manmohan Singh used to speak in a soft language, but there were incidents happening, right? Like if you remember the period from 2004 to 2009 or 10, uh, there were terrorist attacks happening on India. Lots of bombs were getting sort of like discovered or blasts happening. Though not many were killed, unlike what happened in Mumbai, but I remember blast happening in Ayodhya, in Mathura, in Hyderabad, right? So that basically created a leadership security kind of anxiety. The third one was a cultural anxiety. In a sense, I think somehow the message gone or was created and slowly, right? Like I think it starts happening. Perhaps the intention of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was right in establishing Sachar Commission, but basically the conversations that began in the wake of Sachar Commission, then I think the government of Andhra Pradesh, and which was a Congress government, basically proposing a 5% reservation for Muslim. So, and then there were certain other things happening in universities and other places, which also gave rise to some sort of cultural anxiety that Hindus are under siege. And all these sort of like anxieties culminated uh, and mobilized very efficiently by Narendra Modi and his campaign team. And that's what basically in 2014, what we get is fast-paced process. It would have happened even if Narendra Modi was not on scene, perhaps 10 or 15 or 20 years down the line. But basically between 2012 and 2014, he managed to uh, take all these anxieties and basically project himself as an alternative. He was seen as a strong leader. He managed to create the legend of Gujarat model. He managed to sell himself or remain like he is still known as Hindu with the Samrat. So in a way, he basically combined all those anxieties and presented himself as an alternative.
Yeah, so basically every time gets the thought it needs, every time gets the leader it needs. But
Yeah.
you also mentioned something very interesting about the social mobility. And one thing which we are noticing is that the BJP is now simply brushing aside all the regional social justice parties, right? So BJP is actually outcompeting the Mandal parties. BJP is even outcompeting the Ambedkarite politics in the terms of social engineering. What is happening there? I mean, how come BJP is outcompeting these original pioneers of the social engineering or social justice parties?
I think there is no mystery left there unless we want to create a mystery there. I think while Mandal and these social justice parties, I think in principle, uh, were talking something else or talking the right things, but in practice, they were not doing all those things they were talking about, right? And anybody who, like, we both come from UP, so we know what SP or BSP were doing in a way, and how BJP managed to counter that. And again, it didn't happen overnight. So just to give you two examples, Samajwadi Party calls itself a party of backward caste. But I don't think anybody would doubt, even several Samajwadi Party members would disagree with it, that Samajwadi Party in some ways became a Yadav party in UP, right?
Yadav Ashraf party.
Ha. Largely, like it seemed that if there is a position vacant, that position, and these are jokes, so there must be some truth in jokes, that the position was kept vacant till an eligible Yadav was found to fill that position. So in some ways, there was a representational blockage, not just in politics. but also in matters of distributing state resources among other backward castes. So other backward castes basically felt a short script that we are being mobilized to vote for them, but we are not given our due share both in governance as well as in resources.
Yes.
Perhaps it was basically like a part of political sort of like repertoire that that within like when Samajwadi Party was in power between 2012 and 2017, there were certain elements of whom you can call as mafias or antisocial elements or gundas. The targets of those basically uh, uh, gunda and mafia elements were both sort of like upper caste and trading classes because they had money, and even the lower segments of Hindu society because they could be sort of like just crushed whenever they asked anything. So both not getting representation and getting beaten when they asked for basically created some sort of antagonism. And I think this sort of like uh, violence angle was lower in the Bahujan Samajwadi Party government, but again, that party also largely seemed to cater the interest of the Jatavs, not other Dalit communities. So what BJP did, and it didn't do overnight, it has been working on these two aspects for a long, long time, and one can cite evidences, is basically in 20, after 2014, it managed to create a wedge between the dominant caste of the backwards, which is Yadav versus others, and dominant caste of Dalit, which is Jatov versus others in UP. And so I'm just using UP example, which has been replicated elsewhere. So you saw a larger segment of these communities siding with the BJP. Uh, the party, along with RSS, has been slowly working to mobilize them. It has also been like either in rhetoric or at least, in terms of like moving certain policy decisions to convince them that we are serious about it. It's not just we are doing it. So when Rajnath Singh was the chief minister of UP way back in 2001, he basically instituted a commission to categorize OBC because the argument was that only two or three castes within the OBCs get all the benefits of the reservation. Rest of these communities don't get, and that's why we recategorize. I think those elements slowly sort of like build your credibility. So it's not you do one thing and today you get benefit of it. You keep doing things, then you see that Samajwadi Party what they are doing. Then you get a BJP leader who is ready to call himself as OBC. All these factors combined, and there is sort of like movement towards ideological right. So everything combined, what you get is basically a larger segment of non-Yadav OBC and non-Jatov Dalits voting for the BJP. In fact, in Bihar, not in recent 2020, but in 2019 elections, you also saw certain segments of Yadav voting for the BJP. So it's not just basically the creation of uh, dominant caste versus non-dominant caste wedge, but also there is like you have to give credit to Prime Minister Narendra Modi that he has managed to sort of like convince people of his aspirational agenda. Now, whether aspirations are met or not, like someone from the ground should inform us. But we know that there has been improvement in service delivery, at least like and there is also a greater expectation. So if I see you getting it, I expect tomorrow my number would also come. And I think that story was very much visible in 2019. And the new, like many have sort of like started writing about it, what Modi managed to do in his first term is create a new welfareism model, welfare policies which are very visible. And then I think there is a very centralized monitoring. So, of course, there is a problem in the process of centralization, but there is actual delivery that is taking place, and that is making people trust the prime minister much more than other leaders of our time.
So this is what we say, that how correct it is to call BJP a Hindu right because it's actually a Hindu left. Would you agree?
I think it's so.
And
So
that is
the
why
left,
left parties don't succeed in India, because the space is occupied by the BJP.
So that's a very, very smart strategy BJP and Prime Minister Modi has deployed post 2014. Uh, so, basically, BJP ideological agenda caters to Hindu right, and I don't think anyone should have any doubts about it. Now, what you're basically the left element you're bringing is that BJP also plays or does the distributive politics very well, much better than the parties on the center left or the left, which is also true. And I think that's the sort of like someone would basically call it as a populist politics and get done with it. That what Modi is doing is just a populism, right? Basically appealing to the core through ideological messages and passing on welfare benefits to a poorer section of the society and building a coalition. I think there is something more to it than this. IPM realizes that a large segment of Indian population has been reliant on the state, and you cannot suddenly take it away. But he's basically that there is a difference between and I've written about this. I think all parties in India have to be welfareist. Given it's a poor country, you have to have a welfare agenda on board. You have to appear pro-poor. But I think there is a difference in the language which I've seen people from Congress or Rahul Gandhi speak. It seems like we are giving you this, ye hai, ye diya. PM speaks in a very different language, which is basically a language less of a patronage, but more of an empowerment. He basically gives so the Ujjwala scheme is not just giving cylinders to poor household. It is basically talked in a language of that it will improve basically the healthcare of mothers cooking in the home and other things. Plus, simultaneously, what he also does, he asks the middle classes to give up the subsidy on that on these cylinders. So it is in that sense a very multi-pronged approach of what BJP and the Prime Minister Modi is doing on that.
Yes, yes. So we are seeing the success of the BJP, a dominance of a single party, but we're also seeing lots of pushback coming from non-political forces. Those were not the part of the political party per se, because, as you said, opposition has somehow surrendered to the BJP. But you see this frequent protest, farmers protest and upper caste protest. Then you have the Muslims protest. Then you have the different community-based protests which are coming out. You wrote an article recently that one of the reason is that the BJP has cut out the traditional elites from the equation. So there's lots of unrest which is brewing on the ground. And I also wrote 1 or 2 months back about that. This is India is trying to become a high-end state, more centralized kind of a state. So then you are with a clash with the local elites. So where do the elites fit in the India's political journey?
So that's a good question, and I did remember reading your piece. I think it was like in January in Hindustan Times. Let me sort of try to answer this question because it's a difficult question to answer, and I'm thinking about it. I don't have a fully sort of laid out answer to this question. We spoke in the beginning of unintended consequences of things you do, right? So I think one of the unintended consequences of BJP's Congress Mukt Bharat is this. When you sort of so political parties in democracy serve as channel of basically grievances, political mobility and everything. Now, in BJP's effort to basically crush Congress to an extent that it cannot basically seen as a competitor, creates a vacuum. Now, if there are any grievances, people are not going to political parties or they're not even calling political parties for those grievances. So the vacuum is created, and those vacuums are filled by these interest groups or civil society actors because, there are actors in the society, they will rush into the vacuum. The second point is basically a lot of these things are basically a feature of a dominant party system, right? Basically, you have electoral dominance, opposition is surrendered, there is no one to sort of like, civil society actors rushing in. So grievances will rise. And because you are a dominant party, you also take many unilateral decisions and unilateral approach. In BJP's case, I think there are two reasons. One, BJP has internalized this idea, and which may be true, I don't know, but they have internalized this idea that there is there is a section of academics, journalists, elites, and basically a group which thinks that BJP has no right to govern India, right? That they are Hindu nationalist party. There is no space for such a political party in their India, which is basically, that's why you always see this writings or television commentaries on idea of India under sea, right? And BJP, in a way, responds it to this with its brute electoral majority. That who are you to tell us how to run things? People have been voting us with bigger mandates in national parliament and states, and we will do things the way we deem fit. Now, of course, like in a diverse country like India, when you try to push things your own way, there are going to be confrontations. And because there are no elites and political parties present to sort of channelize those confrontations, you will keep seeing these protests. So I suspect that the number of non-party protests will continue to rise if this fracture continues. The third point, which we both have been thinking from a sort of like a different angle, so it is natural, not natural, but it is bound to happen that when a new regime, so it's like electoral victory of BJP in 2014 was not just an electoral turnover, right? In elections, parties win and go. That keeps happening. Perhaps, and that's why, like, we see 2019 or a period before that as rise of the Second Republic, because it's a new regime in the making, right? It's not just a new party coming in, it's a new set of rules and governance arrangement and apparatus are going to put in place, which means that the old elites, some of the old elites, or a large part of the old elites will have to be cut off or shunted, right? Because the old elite was keeping the previous system alive or ticking. And as a new regime, you think they need to be replaced, otherwise they will keep serving the interest of the old. I think some people are going to argue that new elites have started emerging. It will take some time and you will have a new system in place sooner or later. I would rather say, sure, you can wait for the new elites to emerge, but at least you have to start putting the basic tenets or the framework of what that new political order is going to be. See, any regime or any state, as you mentioned about the high state end, like their basic premise is the stability of the system, stability of the order, right? And that can be created only by getting diverse actors together. Now, I'm not at all saying bring previous elites back or bring previous parties back. Basically, create a framework on which a new political settlements could be forged, right? This is a moment of churning. But in the moment of you cannot, like in a nation's time, 5 year or 10 year is a very, very long time. So we can't sort of like, okay, by the end of the second uh, term of Modi government, we will see the remnants of what the tenets of the new framework is going to be. That would be too late, because by that time, these protests and increasing discontent would have gone to an extent that it would have become very, very difficult for this regime to sort of like contain them. So political settlements needs to be forged sooner or later, and you need to sort of bring certain people on the board, consult them, and create sort of
create a wider social and political consensus for the legitimacy of the new order.
Yes. Otherwise, what will happen is, one, as you rightly mentioned, it would be difficult to contain, but you are going to waste all your energies and political capital in containing these non-party protests on a day-to-day basis. So what you will be doing is firefighting, right? Someday you'll firefight this group, other day you will firefight, do this. When will you get time? And then there are every other month you have elections, right? So when do you get time to govern?
Yes,
So you have to
that's a
save
very
your
important.
political capital for bigger things rather than wasting them in these arenas.
Yeah, of course. So we have so many elections this year. Then again, next year will be the UP election, the
Yeah.
mother of all the elections in the state level. So that's something we need to think about. We don't know as to which side the India will swing, but we are certainly in a period of flux. So we will see more disruptions, more unrest, and more changes going forward. But thank you, Rahul, for talking to us. We thought we will do a 30-minute discussion, but now it's almost 50 minutes. But that's the beauty of talking to a political scientist. So many wonderful insights, Rahul. Thank you for it.
Thank you, Abhinav. It was a lovely conversation for me as well. Having these conversations also forces you to think new things. So
Thank
thank
you.
you for that.
Thank you, Rahul. And thank you, audience, for listening to us. And please do not forget to subscribe and join the channel. Also, I will put the link of the Rahul's book in the description. So please do check it out. Thank you.